Have you ever wondered what's the best way to build a following online and create the impact that you know that you can create? Well, on this week's episode, I'm excited to bring on Vinnie Potestivo as a guest. Vinnie is an Emmy Award-winning Media Advisor who grows personal brands and founder-led companies by scaling content distribution, brand visibility, and media reach. Vinnie is the editor-in-chief of I Have a Podcast and is responsible for discovering and amplifying the voice of independent podcasters worldwide. In his previous career, Vinnie was a network executive at MTV Networks. The early hits included Punk'd, The Osbournes, TRL, Eighth and Ocean, Wild and Out, and The Challenge. Since then, he and his team at VPE.TV have continued to be well-trusted connectors who develop and distribute original content across all media platforms, especially podcasts. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to become more discoverable and how to grow your influence. Introducing Emmy Award-winning media discovery expert, Vinnie Potestivo. Welcome to the VJ Kyla Show, everyone. On today's episode, I'm excited to have Vinnie Potestivo join us. He's an Emmy Award-winning discovery expert, and I'm really excited for this conversation. Vinnie, welcome to the show.
Yes, you discovered this episode. Congrats, listeners, for being here. And VJ, congrats on finding me. Thanks. It took my entire life to get here. Maron, the journey it's been.
I love that. No, the way you describe that, right? You think things like this, I mean, I take it for granted, and then you realize, yeah, you actually went through your entire life to get this to this exact moment. I think that's actually really cool insight. Could you actually talk about your story, how you got to where you are in this space? I find it fascinating.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's fascinating now that, hindsight is blissful, by the way. And I even love this question that I get to answer that every single day. It reminds me of the power of perspective and the stories that we tend to find ourselves being locked into, which is certainly something that a big pain point of mine when I was like 19, 18. I was really tied to a story that I thought I was the superhero, but truly I was the villain and the victim. And it was the worst version of a story. When I realized I had the power to change that story and take action, my life changed. And then I ended up, as you sort of alluded to a bit, I ended up going to MTV for 10 years, where I helped people change their reality through reality television. The Osbournes, Ashton Kutcher, Jessica Simpson, Carmen Electra, and Dave Navarro, Ashley Parker Angel. I can think of all the artists that, previously had 3 to 4 minutes in a music video to get a message out there, that MTV gave them 30 minutes a week to tell their story. And the power in getting the visibility of that story, making that story shareable, that led to the discoverability of those brands, has been something that changed my life. And I'm passionate now about helping business owners and individual independent talent brands, us, get discovered. People who can create our content and own it and not have to sell it to a network for it to be seen by the audience. And I'm really passionate to help people get discovered through the media and content that we're creating right now.
Thanks for going through that. So I know with Instagram and YouTube and all the social medias, a lot of people are blowing up in a great way, and it's just changing lives for them, their friends, their family. And if you were to start over, let's say you had zero influence online, what can you do right now to start building that influence?
Yeah, I'm like, wait, I literally do have zero influence online. You know what it is? I think the first thing I would do that I didn't do before is set some goals, realistic goals, and stick to them. Once it's kind of like going to the gym. Once you go to the gym, you start losing weight, you start shifting, what the goals are, you start moving them farther and farther. And that incentivizes creatively, growth in a really unhealthy way. To be able to accomplish and achieve goals creatively is important. And for those goals not to be tied to financial success, because financial resources finite, creative resources are infinite. The more creativity you have and use, the more creativity you have. The more you spend money, the less you have. They work opposite each other, yet in social media we want them to happen in tandem. We want social success and proof, we want financial success happening at the same time. So being really crystal clear on the goals in the outset I would say it this way. Social media is an emotion. It's an opportunity for us to let someone feel a certain way about us, how let that even inform how you show up on social media. How do you want to be seen? How do you want to be remembered? How do you want to be shared? When you have the visibility that you're looking for, you have so much control now over where and how and with whom, you're what you're doing when you get discovered versus 25 years ago when I was the guy at MTV and I would tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you've got a great look. I'm going to come to Times Square for we'll do an interview and we'll see if you can make you a VJ, a video jockey, we call them back in the day. So, you don't need the casting director. You don't need anyone else's approval for visibility and shareability to happen. And that leads to discoverability. That's the secret sauce, by the way, is shareability. Like if you're looking to get discovered, increasing your visibility is going to make people get exhausted, make them feel like everyone has access to you. It takes away the ego reward that I might get by sharing your information with someone who I know might be able to, learn from you and find your information valuable. But if you make it shareable, I think that those are the real opportunities to connect emotionally, to connect on a much deeper level, and for their ego to be rewarded by the gift of sharing, by giving them the gift of sharing. So I think that the goal setting crystal clear goals from me in the get-go was something that I wasn't doing. And those goals, by the way, would be shares, and those goals would be saves. It would be shares because to me, that's how I want to grow my awareness on Instagram, is by people saying, wow, this is so good, I had to share it. Like I want to give someone something so good that they're like, oh man, I got this. I got to share it first because this is going to make me look great. I think about that when I'm creating content. And then on the other hand, there's content that I create where I want them to save it. It's wordy, it's deep, it's generally emotional and very, very honest from the heart. I really open up and put it out there. And I hope that that moment is something that you can hold on to and lean on in other moments in life where we may be able to work through, that together. But shares and saves are the two things that I would be focusing on if I was looking to build credibility from scratch on social media. The other thing, by the way, can I give you one technical thing that I would do just to blow it out of the water and be crazy, unique, different? I would go get a Jiffy account because that's completely free. I would create a really cute animated sticker of myself and tell people to go create stories using my sticker. In fact, I do that now. I help brands and people stand out using GIFs on Giphy or GIFs on Jiffy, however we say it. And it's that visibility that you're associated with in these keywords that even allows people to really stand out. So like that's one creative thing that I might do just to build more authority and awareness so that when people type in certain keywords, my face, my brand, my colors, my, energy is communicated in that moment of time based on search, not based on my innate visibility.
Right. Well, thanks so much for going through that, talking about the shares and the saves. And again, that was from a social media perspective. Kind of backtracking a little bit, if you were not on social media, how would you get discovered? Or social media kind of the only ways now to get discovered?
I actually would prefer to answer that version of the question, by the way. So social media for me is a shared space and is not enough sharing with the collaborators on those spaces. So for me, I try to get as much as I can off the space. Right now, for me, blogs are killing it for me. I take a podcast episode and turn it into a blog. I publish it on ihaveapodcast.com. First off, I took my blog RSS from ihaveapodcast.com and I went to Google News. So news.google.com, and you'll see, if you type it, it'll be a list of all the sources that Google News is pulling from. So I got my RSS blog approved and verified by Google News, which is now listed as a source on the Google News index, and other websites and other platforms are pulling my blog RSS now because I'm being seen as a source and not as a story. So that's just one thing that I was able to do by creating the blog system. The blogs themselves, I put into something called an aggregator. My favorite aggregator out there is something called Q. So if you go to QUUU.co, you can sign up for like a free account. And what that allows you to do is when you sit down, you want to look at blogs, specifically maybe about podcast marketing, and you're literally given 5, 6, 10 blogs. You're given, the AI searches the tags and it gives you what you want. And your purpose is to either read and share, or just share, because some of us just want to be aligned with content, but we don't have the time to write it ourselves. So align and share that to LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and Reddit and some of the text-heavy social platforms. So I'm putting your podcast episode as a blog underneath someone's nose at a point in time when they're looking for input, as opposed to maybe on social media where they're not looking for input. They're looking for entertainment, or the dopamine rush of just being in the know and being in the loop and whatever that looks like. So I'm able to introduce you at a point in time where someone's specifically looking for your topic, which means that all that fuss, the artwork, and all the other pieces to the puzzle that we use mostly as podcasters for visibility. And by the way, I kind of turned your answer into like blogs through podcasting, but maybe I would say if you don't have a podcast, then lead with an original idea, and you take that original idea and you turn it into a blog post. And then you go on a couple of podcast episodes as a podcast guest. Because let me tell you something, there is no finer way right now. It's crazy. It's the barrier to, it's crazy how rewarding being a podcast guest is. You're first off, no one owns podcasting. People own their podcast. And when you have the ability to connect with a podcaster who's responsible and they do their research and they publish and there's output, that is a different creator than what I've experienced in the influencer category of like creating content on social media. And when you have the ability to connect with somebody who is high level output, who's creating social cards, who's creating blogs, newsletters, that content is evergreen. In January of 2023, Google basically turned off podcasts as a search result in searches. So in December of last year, they took away the play button. And then earlier in 2023, they announced they're completely removing podcasts as a search result, which means that we have to find ways to stand out. I like podcasts because you only need like a temporary connection to an audio file to download it to be able to listen to it. There's way more people on this planet that can access that technology than any video, even back in the 90s when people watched TV, like even the good old, even in millions, hundreds of millions, right, might have watched the Osbournes or Punk'd. And I was lucky to work on shows that had, reach like that. But blogging is one of those things that I think is really gonna it's going to stand the test of time, especially with Chat GPT and this conversation around AI, blogs, and there's a way for us to see what percentage of text on the page was potentially written by a machine versus us. So what we say is not as important now as who says it, and that's where I think we can really stand out. Is it in blogs specifically, because they're so shareable on social networks and in podcast notes and YouTube videos and that piece. And it's something that you own. And that's kind of why I like the podcast part too. It's something that you own. It's intellectual property. Punk'd, Newlyweds, Osbournes, Ashton Kutcher doesn't own Punk'd. MTV does. Nowadays it would be a very different, Nick Cannon doesn't own Wild 'N Out. But what happened was we realized in the American market, by the way, in the public media, because most companies are publicly traded, they take all of the rights outside of America. It's actually illegal to retain all the rights as a platform. So what happens is producers sell something internationally and then they bring it back to America and we license it and then we bundle it. Like we all know the word bundling now because of Netflix and Peacock and HBO Max. That's what we have the ability to do with our content being blogs as written intellectual property and podcasts as video and audio video and audio content as well.
So you made a very strong case about podcasts and blogs. And so are those two your go-to media sources?
Right now they are, because there's in my 25 years of creating content on a professional and on an individual and independent level, I've never worked in a medium like podcasts that were more malleable, that turned into more versions of itself. I've written one-sheet decks. I've done pilots, presentations, run-throughs. Those tend to not even see the light of day. And I can't tell you how awesome it has been to prove content through podcasting where we own it. And when I go to sell it at a network, if it's true crime and we're selling it to Netflix for a docu or for a docu series and HBO Max for a scripted series, that I have the ability to do that with podcasting succinctly, easily. It's easier for me to turn podcasts into books than it is for me to turn a book into a podcast, if that makes sense. It's
That definitely
easier
makes
for
sense.
me to make a podcast into a book than it is for me to make a book into a TV show, even, because it proves the audience, it proves execution. And here's my last thing about podcasting that I love, especially audio podcasting, is so video podcasting is funny to me right now. Video podcasting is like we came up with an excuse to just have two static cameras looking at us with one microphone pointing at our face for 40. It's not a very interesting visual, no matter how, whatever we do or how good we look on camera, and that actually makes it great for putting it on the big screen TV. I can see why podcasts on YouTube really do well, because you don't need to be in the room to know what's on TV. If it's a podcast, you know the cameras, the setup traditionally, and it's the audio that fills the room. It reminds me of MTV back in the day. But what I was going to say about podcasting as an audio form is when you remove video, when you remove the visual element of creative communication, you have such an easier target of success than having to get all the things that need to go right for video: frame rate, clarity, color correction, all the things that happen with video that complicate storytelling, that audio removes. And I think it allows audio to be a more impactful medium than to be honest, than some books, or at least because it proves, everything proves the numbers. So, and I think here's my like prediction. There's a downturn in podcast creations. Everyone's sort of talking about it now. It's no surprise, because when there's a big boom, people get nervous about shelf space. Although I can tell you more platforms than podcasts. I can tell you more new Apple Plus and Peacock and HBO, like all the pluses and all those things, more so than podcasts, right? Like that, I can believe in that. But it's that the podcast space is growing, and they say, are you afraid? Is it growing? Are you afraid of being consumed? Is it growing faster than you? I'm like, it is me. Like, we are VJ owns this space. Like, by the way, this episode just added another 45, 30, hopefully 60 minutes to the conversation. We are creating this space. The alchemy of our industry and podcasting is built by us. So that's cool if the podcast industry is growing at the rate you say it is, because I'm part of that growth. Like, that I'm part of that alchemy of creation in podcasting. And that's something that I can't say is true about television.
Vinny, so for those who are listening who are interested in starting a podcast, what are some do's and don'ts? So this is episode 50 something. I'm not sure exactly which episode we're recording right now, but I've made some mistakes, I think, and I'm still learning. I'm not at all perfect. I'm still trying to get better, but what kind of advice do you have for someone who is on episode 1 or thinking about starting their own podcast?
All right. The do's and don'ts. So I would say the do's are make lots of mistakes, make them as early as possible, man. If you think a lot of people are going to listen to your podcast, then hurry up and make those mistakes as ASAP. Because by the time the rest of the world shows up, by the time you're on those top ranking, top 10, top 100 podcasts, you really want to have control over your presence, your words, and the responsibility of creating that conversation more than anything. That clarity and that level of communication starts to come into play, once the podcast starts. But making those mistakes, trusting the people around you. Some people feel like, I don't want to bother I felt like this way. I don't want to bother my friends. Oh, my friends are so important. They're so busy. They're not going to want to, maybe I should wait to get bigger. This is what I said. Maybe I should wait to get bigger before I'll actually say, maybe I should wait to get bigger before I ask Mandy Moore to come on my podcast. Because maybe what I want to do is just make sure I'm as big as possible. And then I'll be ready for her. And it was an amazing friend of mine, Heidi, who was like, Vinny, you call up Mandy Moore and you'd say, look, I'm creating something and I can't think of a better person to start with than you. And that was someone who knew me well enough to know that, and for context, I'd worked with Mandy Moore since she was like 15, 16 at MTV. We have a 25-year span history together, working together in a solid friendship. So maybe you might not relate to having an A-list celebrity like that in your Rolodex, but we've got powerful people that are in positions to our communities that rock it, and whether they're in public office or in our family or a teacher or a professor or someone who we have with high esteem, we tend to not want to start there. And I think that's like one place where I would say I urge people to start in a safe space with people you know. The other thing I would say is, before you record your first episode, get out there as a podcast guest. Trust me, I became a much better host when I understood how to be a better guest. And I talk to celebrities on my podcast. They have the education and experience of being a guest professionally for a living. You know what I mean? So I kind of, in a weird way, learned how to be a host based on how they were presenting as the guest. What I had to figure out was, as the host, how can I also make sure like my personality and my energy and like me is represented, in this conversation as well. Clarity. I keep it simple, man. My episodes are 10 minutes long because I'm out to inspire. So I don't want you to listen to me more than 10 minutes. I want you to go do something after listening to these, something small or something big, but there's going to be something that happened. But I now stated one topic. By the way, when I called Mandy Moore and I launched my podcast with her, it was a 45-minute interview I did with her. And the episode felt like me talking about her career, and it felt like she was a guest on my podcast, and it felt very much about her specific trajectory. And I actually went back in and re-edited it. So I kept that episode there. That's 45 minutes. That's episode 2, I think. And I've released 4 or 5 episodes afterwards, pulling just 5 or 6 minute clips from that larger episode, because she said some things she said the input dictates the output. It's okay to watch TV and listen to music, but you have to know the words in the zeitgeist if you want to be in the zeitgeist. So you have to understand, what we're talking about to be able to be talked about. When Chat GPT came out, that input dictates the output. I was like, Mandy Moore, you're like a visionary. It's Chat GPT AI. It's all about the input dictates the output, the mindfulness journey of it. So I was able to, because of the global conversation around AI, take a conversation I had with Mandy Moore specifically about content creation and pivot it into a conversation about AI and content creation, and modernize the conversation, but reflect on an original source of conversation that I had with Mandy Moore. So like creating this space, the old me would have been like, oh, it was in an episode, people heard it. I'm not gonna repurpose something. Repurpose is not in my vocabulary. Pre-purpose is in my vocabulary. I'm very mindful of why I'm taking content and moving it forward. And I have a distribution channel and platforms waiting for content. The same way that news organizations have quotas. I've built a system where I have to have quotas because I need to have content so I can keep making impact and talent.
Good. Could we talk a little bit more about these systems that you have?
Yeah, sure. For me, because I talk to my old friends from MTV on I Have a Podcast, which is the name of my podcast, I Have a Podcast, it created a situation where I didn't get to have new guests on my podcast. And I was bummed by that, because what we're doing here is the priceless part of podcasting, right? Like really having a real conversation and like becoming friends. And, this is the power of podcasting. And I don't get to do that with new people on my podcast because of a creative decision that I chose to make. So I went and created ihaveapodcast.com for 2 reasons. One, because I wanted to have a platform for talent so that the people that I wasn't able to have on my podcast, I can now have in blogs, and I can do an article with them and I can ask them the same questions, and it's going to have impact in a way that hits SEO and all the things that we hope podcasting does. It allows me to get in podcasting and have that, that output piece as well. It allowed me to have this like gratitude gift. So, and just for the rest of the world listening, at the end of this call, when we stop recording, I will have already asked VJ if he would like to be featured podcaster on my podcast, that I've created a space where I get to highlight the people like VJ who I meet. Yes, I'm going to go and leave him a 5-star review. And yes, I'm going to talk to all y'all about how to do that. By the way, if you're listening to this podcast right now, just go back to that player wherever you're playing us from and hit 5 stars, and let this be the episode that gets you to the 5-star review. Give my man VJ like
Thank
5
you.
stars.
Thank you.
Come on,
That's
what's
so
the
kind
cost?
of you.
What's the cost? But also check it out, because I too will have listed myself in the 5-star reviews, and I will have listed, in the comments as well to support this. And it's in finding. And by the way, if anyone does do the 5-star review, please take a screenshot of it and then tag me. I'm at Vinnie Potestivo on Instagram. Tag me on it. It's leaving the 5-star review is solid for VJ, for people who go to that platform and see it. But if you really want to help him, if you really want this to be a success, then sharing, like I mentioned earlier, sharing is what leads to discoverability, not the visibility of the 5-star review in the app that it is, but it's in sharing that act. And that doesn't cost us anything. And oftentimes it's not creating shareable content that actually costs us business on the adverse direction too. So it's a really big win. And I'll leave it at that.
Hey, Vinny, thank you so much for going through that. I wanted to bring the conversation back to blogging. It was actually something I was really interested in. I wrote 3 articles myself on a more technical topic related to investing. And I really enjoyed that process. But then I started getting to YouTube videos, started doing more videos. And, there's pros and cons to both. And again, I haven't put out hundreds of pieces of content, so I'm still new to this. What would you recommend someone who's just getting started in blogging to look out for, some do's and don'ts? Because you talked about in the podcasting space, and I love that advice. Would love to hear it from the blogging side.
Yeah, blogging is really cool because it's not finite. It's changeable. Like you can go back in and edit it and adapt it and turn it and grow it and turn it into more, or even strip it down. Starting off with a great concept, a great article, and then maybe within the month you find yourself having appeared on maybe a couple of podcast episodes where you talked about the article. Being able to go back to that blog article to update it with links to podcast, to give social proof as listened to, as heard on these podcasts, the ability to go back in. It's a really important medium to know that you can keep updating it and keeping it relative. Also, there are platforms that are built based on other people's content. So like you said, you were you a guest blogger in this situation?
No, this is just on my own website, vjkailash.com. So
Oh,
just wrote a
cool.
few articles. Yeah.
Yeah, but have you ever pitched yourself to be on other blogs that have guest blog writers?
I haven't. Tell me more about that. I've heard of it, but I've never explored it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, Medium is one of the larger sort of databases of these types of services, but there are dozens, if not hundreds, of blogs that are out there that are actively looking for contributors. And I would say it this way. One of the bigger issues that I'm seeing now is that people are getting stuck on the story, especially storytellers who, we're in the creator economy, and stories are everything. And everyone's talking about the value of stories. I don't know about you, but the source is a pretty damn important part of the story. Who's telling that story, where that story comes from, the point of view of that story, the reason that story exists. I think a lot of that stems from the source. And I think that as a blogger, especially, or as a writer, being tied to individual stories versus like what you've done, where you have a home base, where you're seen as a source. Like for you, I would say the next step for you is publishercenter.google.com. That's the website you actually go to take your blog RSS and then get it verified by Google News. The benefit to that is that once it's verified by Google News, then it's easy to get it migrated to Bing and Yahoo and Flipboard and all of the other SEO enhanced platforms that help us stand out. Blogs are really it's social shareable. So it's because they work so well on social networks, as well as they do on WhatsApp and our iMessages. The blog moves quickly. The URL doesn't often change, but the page can change. That's powerful to know someone has the link and someone may be coming back to this page. Check. I do something on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has a newsletter feature. So if you have creator mode turned on LinkedIn, it lets you have this newsletter feature. The newsletters are basically a blog system within LinkedIn, and it has SEO benefits that are read by Google outside of the LinkedIn system. So like whereas most of our posts on Instagram aren't showing up in like our Google search results, if you happen to have a search result for your name. If not, then it's healthy. It's healthier to have a search result for your name inbound than to keep going to Google and searching for your name that way. So I'll put up, for me, that's how I ration. I want to know what's out there too, but that information that is out there helps us helps control the image, the impact that we're having, and that's measurable. And what I can do on LinkedIn is through their newsletter systems, I actually have like a blog post, like one specific blog post for my podcast. I have a podcast, and then every week I just go into that same link that now has link authority on LinkedIn, and is shared in a lot of places. The same link is shared in a lot of places. And I just keep updating that page I go to Spotify, I take the embed code from the podcast player, and then I drop it in on my newsletter. This way people don't need to leave LinkedIn to go listen to my podcast.
Got it. So do you recommend people post on LinkedIn for the blogs, or should they post on their own website and link it to LinkedIn? Because with LinkedIn, you don't own it, right? LinkedIn owns it. And so you won't really be getting traffic to your website.
Yeah, exactly. They're two very different ecosystems. I duplicate, by the way. So I literally, and now with the advent of Chat GPT, I'm able to sort of tweak some of the writing that I wrote myself, that I'm able to just tweak slightly into something so it's not exactly identical, but the artwork and the tone and the messaging are the same. I think that the LinkedIn newsletter is a win because it gives me 4 opportunities to connect with somebody on LinkedIn. It shows up in their in-mail on LinkedIn. It shows up in their feed. If they have alerts turned on their phone, they get the alert from LinkedIn. And if they get emails from LinkedIn to their regular email, they get a regular looking newsletter email to their inbox, Gmail, their work account, whatever it is. So 4 different opportunities to get somebody with the same message, and it doesn't cost anything except for having creator mode turned on, versus MailChimp or any, like constant access. A lot of platforms that just they cost pennies per send, but I have about 5,000 people following me on my newsletter on LinkedIn, and that LinkedIn, this is only less than a year. So they're very engaged and very recent followers. So that was kind of nice. I've been building my newsletter, my subscriber list for about 25 years, since October of 98. I've been growing my subscriber list. So it's pretty old, and open rates aren't what they used to be. And it's a pretty broad reach because everyone that ever auditioned for any show I was ever casting, from Housewives to Laguna Beach to The Hill, all the weird walk of life that I've been on, all fits into one. It's not the best way to keep things organized, but that's what I liked about the LinkedIn newsletter, was that it's a keen and leaned in audience on LinkedIn. And I like translating energy and business on LinkedIn. I spend time on LinkedIn.
So you're saying that because of your vast experiences, not everyone associates with every single article you publish just because it's not relevant to them. So do you segment your list, or is that something you'd recommend the audience does?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the answer is no, I don't segment my list, but the answer is yes, I do recommend that. That's what the audience says. We're scrubbing through now, and it's a bit of a manual process. It's a deep process. I'm hoping to scrub down to about 17,000 in my list of current active people that I'll be able to reach out to.
And so is there anything negative by sending something that's not relevant? I mean, they can mark you as spam, right?
Yeah, I just don't want anyone to ever think I'm not a very general person. Like, I don't really speak in ambiguous terms, and there's a lot of specificity. I don't automate any part. There's no part of my experience that's automated. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I just want to have a brand where people know, if you hear from me, it's me. Some people don't need that, by the way. Some people, maybe in marketing or business, where the numbers speak for themselves, but there's a creative element. There's a magical, intuitive, element that I bring to the equation, in addition to data reading that helps me get to where I get to. So I'm just mindful of that experience. I like using your terms, your words. If I can, not everyone in the whole planet is watching Yellowstone right now. Most people aren't, or even don't even know superheroes, And I never want anyone to feel not included on a conversation because I tried to appeal to them in a more personal way. And for that reason, I like knowing how to connect with these people. Now, some of these shows that I've done in the past, they were for different reasons, like Housewives of New Jersey. Obviously, these are going to be women in New Jersey, probably married. So there's, I can start to probably have businesses, probably, at a certain point in their life or at a certain income level. So I can start to figure out what those purposes are. But to be really blunt, with what I do now, none of that even matters. My podcast strategy, everyone's like, your podcast strategy is so strange. But I fell in love with Podmatch. So there is this platform out there. We talked earlier about like getting on blogs and getting discovered. I would be nowhere if it wasn't for this platform called Podmatch. And they take guests and they take hosts and they create opportunities like this. I talk about discovery and I talk about getting on Jiffy and I talk about winning awards and getting credits. Why podcasters should be getting credit on IMDb. By the way, I don't know if you're listed on IMDb yet, but podcasters who are listed on IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, that's like the number one IP creator data. It's owned by Amazon and it's like the go-to mecca of, all things media. Podcasters have the ability to create data points on IMDb, link backs on IMDb based on who we work with, who our guests are, what our episodes are about. It's creating a data point that our podcasts are not making unless we're physically manually importing that information into IMDb. So I get like really passionate about knowing some of this stuff is right at our fingertips and it's just a matter of access and education. And I think that's kind of where I'm inspired to make sure that independently and small businesses that are creating content have success, because I come from the creative world. I know that people burn out and they don't want to come back and they don't enjoy it and they don't like it. And it's a loss. It's a loss for us. And this is the way that I know I can keep us together.
Thanks for going through that. So with IMDb, is there any prerequisite to get listed or how do we get listed?
Yeah. So what a great question. The prerequisite is you have to have intellectual property that aired. That's it.
Okay. So would this qualify?
So we're hot. We're good.
Oh,
right.
Perfect.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. And you don't need IMDb Pro to create an account. Well, I'll literally, if you go to vpe.tv/hub, I have a creator hub with all literally step-by-step guide. I'll make sure I send you the link after this so that you have the brand new one that I just did. You just need some information and I'll tell you what information you need before you go to the clunky old database entry point at IMDb. They made it really difficult to do, but you just need to have published an episode. It just can't be something that hasn't aired yet. And it's basically you're getting proof that you own intellectual property. You claim executive director, you claim writer, you claim host, you add your guests. If you have a Jennifer, Jennifer, the editor, gets a shout out, she gets on IMDb. If you have a graphic designer, if you have a mixer, if anyone gave you music, anyone ever volunteered, it's a killer place on IMDb to network, right? It's not just, and by the way, how cool that not only do we get to get credit, but we get to give credit. Like that's powerful. And that's giving someone a thumbs up in expertise in a specific area that's going to show up on their Google search results. And it's going to change your Google image searches. It's if you utilize the taglines correctly. My friend Ben Courier has a podcast called The Failure Guy. His tagline is he's the number one failure guy. So if you Google who is the world's number one failure guy, his name comes up, big, bold letters, no matter where you are in the world, by the way, his name comes up. And then you see the resource or the source of that information is IMDb. That's because IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, has a very high, what we call domain ranking authority, domain authority in the world of the internet. So Google sees this as a high value data source. And that's why it's taking what it is and making it as shareable on Google as it is. And it's a great workaround right now for podcasters who aren't going to get visibility in search from these search engines anymore, because podcasting got a little
heated
because too many people made some bad podcasts out. Hey, I come from reality TV. I'll say, like, it was good at first and then everyone did it and it lowered the bar and now we're back to elevating up.
Well, Vinny, thanks so much for going through that. So for everyone that's listening, do you have a piece of advice that you'd recommend? I mean, so far in this episode, you gave a lot of gold nuggets. I really like how you talked about starting a podcast, starting a blog, and create content that's shareable and something that people will save. So you gave a lot of great advice, which I will definitely use. Yeah. But what other piece of advice do you have for someone in this space?
I'll leave you with this. Don't create content that you should make. Create content that you can make. I want to say that again. Don't focus on creating content based on what you feel like, or what you feel like the world is asking you for now, or what you feel like you should be doing. Create the content that you can be, that you're capable of creating. And I say it this way because I'm trying to separate the linear experience of creating content and then needing to publish it at the same time. And what I'm trying to say is that if you can focus on creating content that you're capable of creating, that you can make, what a gift to not even have to worry about the audience yet, to know that in the future, or maybe even immediately, there is a platform that hasn't been built yet, or is about to be built, or maybe one that's been true, tried, and tested, and it's just waiting for you. But to be creating content that we feel compelled to make, more so than should, more than feel a social obligation to create something, more so than what we're truly, sincerely capable. It's deeper than what we're called to make. That type of content might sit in your phone for a little bit. It might sit on your desktop for a year or two, or 10 years, or 20 years. But I've been in media long enough to tell you that if you can record it now, there will be a point in time where the conversation is not just acceptable, but is supported. And in that point in time, if you have the content that you were capable of creating, you'll be prepared to join the conversation. And that is something that I look at like, I'm the friend that takes photos, and then people are like, don't let Vinny take the picture. He never posts anything. Don't give it to him. I'm like, there's a time, it's going to come. Don't worry. Like, I don't have a plan, by the way, but I don't live for the output. I live for the input. And I think that being mindful of our capabilities of what we can create will help us maybe collaborate with other people, figure out how we can support other people in their creative needs and their creative goals, and to build the pieces that, I don't know how to say this, but like to start building the alchemy of change without needing change to be what stirs the alchemy of differentiation. Meaning, we don't need to wait to have a need for content to be able to create the content that we know is worthy and soon will be needed and supported. And it's just a little mindset thing. But I think it's an important one for us. Also, what I'm saying here is have passion projects, make space for passion projects, make sure that you're taking on content and opportunities, and that your business and your character are taking you to places where your talents can support you.
Thank you so much for that piece of advice. And Vinny, what is your favorite book that you'd recommend for the audience?
Oh, I love it. My favorite book, Who Not How. It's a great book, and it really changed my life. When I focus on who I can be working with more so than how I need to be executing certain things in my life to change. And then also the second book, shout out to my friends over at Podmatch. We 16 contributors got together and wrote a book about Podmatch guest mastery, how to master being a podcast guest. And it really changed my life. I have a whole media career that I've done, and there's nothing I've done that's given me more experience and insight into who I am than being a podcast guest.
I need to definitely pick up a copy myself. Thank you so much. And lastly, Vinny, where can our audience get in touch with you? This has been incredible. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom.
Oh, I love it. Well, if they want my information, they got to go to your episode and they got to look it up in the show notes. I'm not going to drop it here in the audio for people who thought there was a cheat at the end of this. I hang out on LinkedIn. I'll say that, but I really will. I'll leave some information in the 5-star reviews, and I can't wait to connect with people. And also, they can hang out with me by hanging out with you. You want to know where I am? Go to VJ's list and look for his friends. Look to the V's for Vinnie Potestivo, and then you'll find me there.
That's perfect. I'll put all this in the show notes. Vinny, thank you so much for your time.
Appreciate you.
Hey, it's VJ. If you liked this video, you are going to love this video. Make sure you click it, leave questions in the comments, and I'm here to help however I can. Hope you have a great day.